I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast. And well, here we are again with a good friend of the show, Mr. Mario Derksen of Novus Ordo Watch. Boy, I got to say that right. Say that right a couple times fast. You may get it wrong. But Mario's here to talk about a recent video put out by Kennedy Hall regarding several points about the SSPX, which we'll get into in a second. Mario, what's up? How are you doing? What are we talking about today?
All right. A few days ago, Mr. Kennedy Hall published a video called 5 Myths about the Society of St. Pius X. And in that video, he responds to 5 common objections that people have about the SSPX. And it is based on his book. He just recently published this, SSPX, The Defense. And Kennedy Hall is doing this, as far as I know, is doing this on his own. This is not an SSPX publication. So he's basically an SSPX adherent, and he's defending them in this book. So I watched the video Kennedy Hall made, and as I was going through it, I thought that it really needed a reaction. It needed a balance from a Sedevacanist perspective. And that's what I'd like to provide today. And I chose not to do that in my typical Tratcast or on the blog, because I just thought we, could try something new here, maybe reach more people this way, and just make it a little bit less formal. This is not going to be some kind of deep academic, discussion. This is just going to be more of an informal reaction to Hall's arguments.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I know anyone who watches the show knows that I am typically a defender of Archbishop Lefebvre, and I think it's a very nuanced conversation, very complicated one, and I think that people tend to think, oh, Sedevacantists, they all hate the Archbishop, and they think he's, the worst, or he's in hell, or whatever, and I think that that's also something that I would like to dispel, because speaking again purely for myself, that's not how I feel about it. So I'm ready to get into this and talk a little bit more of a little bit more of the nuance and say, okay, because I think some of these things, watching the video from Kennedy, I was just a bit confused through some of it. So I'm hoping that maybe you can help clarify exactly what he's trying to get at as well.
Yes. I should also probably add that about 20 years ago, I was an adherent of the Society of St. Pius X myself. So I have a little bit of inside information. I wasn't, one of them, so to speak, for too long, about, I want to say roughly 3 years. But I did some apologetics for them the way Kennedy Hall is doing now. And I did that on the Daily Catholic, which I hereby retract, by the way. But yeah, I just, used to defend them and their position. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And, what converted me to Sedevacantism was realizing that what the Catholic Church actually taught and how things work in the church. And it was pretty clear to me after a short while of, looking into this and being confronted with magisterial evidence that it was just a slam dunk against the SSPX. At the same time, I also want to be clear, I have no personal animosity towards anyone, including Archbishop Lefebvre. I'm not his judge. He had to render he had to render an account to Almighty God, and certainly I pray that, just as for anyone, we want people to go to heaven. So of course we pray that Archbishop Lefebvre, that he made it. But that has nothing to do with the case, really. Like, it has nothing to do with what is and isn't right with regard to the Vatican II religion, with regard to the Novus Ordo Church, and the things Archbishop Lefebvre did, or especially now here the Episcopal consecrations of 1988. That has nothing to do with. It's a matter of objective evidence, right? And it has nothing. So people shouldn't misunderstand and think that if we're against that somehow we hate the people, or we're thinking that we're just so smart and they were also stupid. It has nothing to do with any of that. Let's just look at this without bias as much as possible, objectively, and just say, does this make sense? And so that's how I'd like to approach this. And I think a good way to do that, and by the way, I think I got the title of the video a little bit wrong. The actual title of Kennedy Hall's video is 5 SSPX Myths Debunked, Excommunication, Schism, and More. And it was published on YouTube, let's see, May 11th, 2023. So if you have it available there, Kevin, maybe we can just roll the tape, as they say. And I don't want to, first of all, let me be clear. I really don't want to commit any copyright infringement. Kennedy, if you're watching this, please let us just basically roll the tape so we can let you speak and make your case, and then we can react to it. That's really what this is all about. We're not trying to steal your video here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And apologies to anyone. This is the first time I've done this screen sharing. So if it goes a little haywire, you can blame me because, well, as everybody knows, I'm not a technical savant. So here we go. Let's give it a go. Mario, just tell me when you want me to pause or stop at any point.
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Let's see how this goes.
All right. There he is.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. 5 myths about the SSPX and Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre debunked. Myth number 1. Was Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre excommunicated from the Catholic Church? No, he wasn't. And if you want to know more about this, I recommend you pick up a copy of my book, SSPX The Defense, available on Amazon. I have a detailed account of this. In order to understand this first myth, we have to go back to the actual event itself. So in June of 1988, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and Bishop Castro Maier of Brazil, they consecrated 4 bishops for the SSPX. On July 1st, I think it was just a day later, Cardinal Gantin, who was the prefect for the Congregation for Bishops, published a decree stating that all the bishops involved in that event had incurred what's called a latae sententia excommunication, according to Canons 1364 and 1382 of the Code of Canon Law. What this essentially means, a latae sententia excommunication, is that you have excommunicated yourself by a particular act. It basically means that the penalty exists, and just by doing that thing, you actually incur the penalty. But hold on. The effects of the penalty don't actually apply unless that thing has been declared. So it's been stated that Archbishop Lefebvre and Castro Maier and the other bishops were declared excommunicated. And I should add here as well, I don't believe they ever were excommunicated validly. That's a whole other conversation for another video. Nonetheless, even by the letter of the law, we can prove very easily that even if we do think that they had committed some sort of crime, the actual process never took place that would have officially excommunicated them anyway. That's very important to make that distinction.
Okay, maybe stop right here. Okay, so that was a lot of information already. And first, in order to be able to critique this intelligently, so for the sake of argument, we have to, let's assume for a minute that John Paul II had been a true pope and that essentially, you know, which is what the Society of St. Pius X accepts. So in order to be, likewise with the Code of Canon Law, right? Let's accept that that is the Code of Canon Law. It's the one of 1983. That code is legitimate and valid and binding on the church, okay? Because if we don't assume that, again, just for the sake of argument, then we can't really interact. We can't really very effectively deal with this, okay? So Kennedy Hall just said Archbishop Lefebvre did not incur excommunication. And he stated that even just pretty matter-of-factly, as if that were objectively the case. I think the best he can do is say, I don't believe he was excommunicated, but even that, I think, I mean, you can perhaps believe that, but can you act on the belief or not? That's another question. You know what? Let's deal first with the relevant canon here. And okay. Now, of course, hang on. Where's the decree? So as Kennedy said, on July 1st, 1988, Cardinal Gantin issued a decree. This was one day after the illicit episcopal consecrations. And this decree stated the following. You know what? I can't find it online, of course, right now.
And Cardinal Ganton, as you're looking for that. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. This is the book I'm going to be using, Archbishop Lefebvre and the Vatican. It is published by the Society of St. Pius X, and it has the documents in there. So I'm just going to quote it straight from there. Okay? Go ahead.
And this Cardinal Ganton, was he the cardinal over the area in Switzerland, or why exactly was he the one?
Cardinal Ganton was in the Roman Curia in the Vatican. He was the prefect of the Congregation for Bishops. What had happened, and maybe we'll just back up a little bit here, is that I think it was June. Okay, don't quote me exactly now. At some point, I'm pretty sure it was May or June of 1988, Archbishop Lefebvre announced that he was going to consecrate 4 bishops, and they are the 4 bishops that we all know. It's Bernard Fillet, as well as Richard Williamson, Bernard Tissier de Malloret, and Alfonso de Galarreta. Now, when that happened, after Archbishop Lefebvre announced this, Cardinal Ganton sent a canonical warning, meaning he basically told Archbishop Lefebvre, don't do it, don't go through with this episcopal consecration, because if you do, you will incur automatic excommunication, and so will the 4 bishops will be consecrated by you. That warning was ignored by Archbishop Lefebvre. He went ahead anyway. So on July 1st, so for anybody who has this book, you can find it online on the Vatican website, the prefect of the Congregation for Bishops, Bernard Cardinal Ganton, issued a decree stating that Archbishop Lefebvre and the bishops consecrated, as well as the co-consecrator, I think it was Bishop Antonio de Castro Meyer, who was the retired bishop of Campos in Brazil, that he also had incurred automatic excommunication. And you know what, it's not very long. Let me just quote it. Here is what Cardinal Ganton wrote. Again, the Congregation of Bishops, July 1st, 1988. Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre, Archbishop, Bishop Emeritus of Toul, notwithstanding the formal canonical warning of June 17th last and the repeated appeals to desist from his intention, has performed a schismatical act by the episcopal consecration of 4 priests without pontifical mandate and contrary to the will of the Supreme Pontiff, and has therefore incurred the penalty envisaged by Canon 1364, paragraph 1, and Canon 1382 of the Code of Canon Law. Having taken account of all the juridical effects, I declare that the above-mentioned Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and Bernard Fillet, Bernard Tissier de Malloret, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta have incurred ipso facto excommunication late sententiae reserved to the Apostolic See. Moreover, I declare that Archbishop Antonio de Castro Meyer, Bishop Emeritus of Campos, since he took part directly in the liturgical celebration as co-consecrator and adhered publicly to the schismatical act, has incurred excommunication late sententiae as envisaged by Canon 1364, paragraph 1. The priests and faithful are warned not to support the schism of Archbishop Lefebvre, otherwise they shall incur ipso facto the very grave penalty of excommunication. That is essentially the text, and so it's really rather clear. Now let me quote the canons he cites. First, Canon 1364, paragraph 1, 1983 Code of Canon Law. Without prejudice to the prescript of Canon 194, paragraph 1, number 2, an apostate from the faith, a heretic, or a schismatic incurs a late sententiae excommunication. In addition, a cleric can be punished with the penalties in Canon 1336, paragraph 1, numbers 1, 2, and 3. And in the other canon he cites, 1382, and this is really the one that's the most relevant here regarding the episcopal consecration. A bishop who consecrates someone, a bishop without a pontifical mandate, that's basically the permission slip from the Pope, which is necessary before a Catholic bishop is allowed to consecrate another bishop, without a pontifical mandate, and the person who receives the consecration from him incur a late sententia excommunication reserved to the apostolic see. Let me repeat that. A bishop who consecrates someone a bishop without a pontifical mandate, and the person who receives the consecration from him incur a late sententia excommunication reserved to the apostolic see. So the question is really not terribly difficult. If Archbishop Lefebvre did that, then according to the law of the church, of the Novus Ordo Church, then that excommunication was incurred, right? I mean, I really don't see any wiggle room there.
That's what I've wondered too. That's when I was first watching this, even just common sense, the act that Archbishop Lefebvre did, just without me knowing even the canon law or the teachings of the church, it just makes sense, right? It's just like, okay, well, and I knew the story that, of course, that Rome had said, no, you can't do this. If you do this, kind of an or else type of a thing. And then he did it. Then he did it. And now to act like nothing could have happened from that is a little strange, I think. Yeah,
I mean, clearly the burden of proof, if anything, will be on those who say that, no, that's not what happened. So Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated bishops without pontifical mandate. The law of the church legislates that doing so incurs an automatic excommunication. Therefore, the excommunication was incurred. It's as simple as that. And that is also precisely what Cardinal Ganton said in his decree. He pointed out, he declared that this is the law of the church. Archbishop Lefebvre violated the law of the church. And of course, not only that, he was specifically warned that what would happen.
Right.
And so I really don't see where the problem is.
Well, and I think for me, I mean, obviously, we've seen so much good come from what Archbishop Lefebvre did, and obviously, again, taking out whatever he may have done or not done in his
in some ways,
right, exactly. But I mean, at least from what he did with these bishops, we have a great line of priests. Many priests that I know here in Europe come from the SSPX; they're validly ordained, etc. So I think again, it's like we're not arguing that his act didn't end up being a good one for the faith, but again, it just doesn't. The argument saying that the Novus Ordo is the church, and here are the clear rules of the church, and he clearly broke the rules of the church, that it just doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, right now, and we can leave whatever intentions aside. As far as the external forum is concerned, Archbishop Lefebvre did the exact thing that canon law says incurs an automatic excommunication. Now, the important point about automatic excommunication, late sententiae, is that in order to incur it, in order for your soul to be punished in that way, it does not require the intervention of a judge. Okay, you don't need to be dragged in front of an ecclesiastical tribunal where a judge says you are hereby excommunicated or I excommunicate you. Right. Rather, it happens automatically. And there are a few other crimes you can commit against, according to church law, that will incur such an automatic excommunication. And without looking this up now, I'm pretty sure that committing an abortion or assisting in the commission of an abortion is one of those. Mm-hmm. So just as far as the external forum is concerned, Archbishop Lefebvre, I would say, based on what canon law says, guilty as charged. I really don't see any way out. Now, let's play some more of Kennedy Hall.
All right. Oh, come on.
We got an advertisement.
It has to be.
I'm afraid you're just going to have to let that play, or
sure. Go ahead. You keep talking. Say something really good, Mario, and I'll.
Yeah, no, it's
crazy with these.
Say, right?
Oh, it's crazy with these things. It's like just because you pause it, they have to add on.
No, that's okay. Let me also point out that obviously, folks, anyone throughout church. Well, maybe I should say about churches, but just look in general. Anyone who finds himself declared excommunicated or accused of having excommunicated himself, anyone will always say, well, in my case, that really isn't valid, right? that in my case, this doesn't apply. I had good reasons. I am, justified. I was justified. The excommunication is invalid. It's unjust. You're doing me wrong, and so on. I mean, what heretic, what schismatic, what disobedient cleric would not say that? It's exactly what Father Feeney said, right? Father Feeney didn't accept his excommunication.
Right.
Of course not. He was excommunicated ferende sententiae, not late sententiae. He was actually excommunicated by Pope Pius XII. And, what was his reaction? That's not valid.
Right. Crazy.
I mean, who will say, oh, sorry, in my case, it was valid. Yeah. Now, of course, there are some people who actually do repent. So maybe I shouldn't say that. There are some people who do, after an excommunication, repent. But I mean, my point is, you can always say, in my case, it isn't valid. The point is, though, that you're not the judge, right? If you find yourself on the receiving end of an excommunication, you're the defense, so to speak.
Right.
And you can have your defense lawyer, but you're not the judge. You have to understand that you cannot judge your own case. Just like a priest can't absolve himself of his sins. He too must go to another priest. He must be judged by another. Even the Pope himself must go to another priest for confession. He can't just absolve himself. And so the same thing here. I think Kennedy Hall is thinking that as long as he can mount a good defense, then all is well and the case is settled. Well, no, at best, you have your defense, but if that's not what the judge agrees with, if the judge doesn't render that judgment, or if the judgment of the Holy See is different, you must abide by that judgment. It's end of story. And yes, it could conceivably be wrong. Yes, it could conceivably be unjust, but then you'll just have to suffer the injustice and offer it up to Christ. That's the Catholic position, because it has happened before in church history that someone was excommunicated unjustly.
Right.
And of course, then in the internal forum, I mean, if you're being punished for something you didn't do, then obviously, before God, that excommunication is null and void. But externally, you still have to observe the effects of the excommunication.
Got it. Okay, I think I'm ready to go with Kennedy.
All right, let's hear Kennedy Hall.
It should be noted that an excommunication, even if it's lete sententia, it's not declared by simply saying it. It isn't like, if you ever watch The Office, the show, and Michael Scott declares bankruptcy. He goes, I declare bankruptcy. He was told to declare bankruptcy. And he says that, and they say, you actually have to do something. It doesn't actually just mean you actually say it. So okay. Archbishop Lefebvre
hold it real quick.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess every time I say that now, we're going to have a commercial.
No, I think I fixed it. I think we'll be.
Oh,
good.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So what I just want to say here is that, okay, yes, I guess I can agree that there's, Cardinal Ganton didn't, open his window and say, excommunication, if you want to use that analogy from that comedy there. But by the same token, I would remind Kennedy Hall that by him simply declaring that it wasn't incurred doesn't mean anything either. I mean, the best argument he can make, honestly, what he is saying, if I'm understanding him correctly, is that Cardinal Ganton issued a mere opinion in that decree. It's a decree from the Congregation of Bishops, that he simply issued an opinion, and that opinion happens to be wrong. Okay, well, that's maybe Kennedy Hall's opinion, but if it's going to be a matter of opinions only, well, one of these is from the Holy See and the other is not.
Well, and it seems to me that this is a common issue with the SSPX and these types of groups that it comes into this, okay, who is going to interpret what their church says, right? And we see this with a lot of these, armchair theologians, I suppose, and I guess that's a little harsh, but people who, something comes out of Rome, and then these guys are saying, hey, is this something we need to listen to or not? It just seems, it seems clearly that can't be how the church should work.
They tune into Taylor Marshall to find out what they should think about it. That's insane.
Right.
That is certainly not the Catholic position.
Right.
But
as you say, though, having an opinion on it, so Kennedy having an opinion is one thing, as you say, but then just saying that it is not so because my opinion is it is not so. It just
that's the problem. So I think he's guilty of doing the same thing he's accusing Cardinal Ganton of doing. But you know what? Cardinal Ganton spoke as the head of the Congregation of Bishops with the authority of the Pope behind him. Kennedy Hall is just Kennedy Hall.
Right.
So okay, maybe keep going with the video.
Sure.
Said to have been declared excommunicated. But here's the problem. There was a New Zealander, a Kiwi lawyer, who was very well known in the church. He was a very highly ranked canon lawyer. His prestige was very high in the church. He himself was very traditionalist, and he wrote something about the excommunication of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the bishops that I'm going to read here at length because it's just the best explanation I could find, and I just simply couldn't do it myself. He said, "What about that excommunication? It is no less a fiction than the charge of schism." We'll get to schism in a second. "To begin with, there has never been a condemnatory sentence imposed on the presumed excommunicati. So far, only a declaratory statement has been issued stating that the men were excommunicated latae sententiae by reason of the violation of penal law, forbidding the consecration of bishops without papal mandate. A declaratory statement is no more than that, a statement making an assertion. It doesn't make that which is asserted true.
Okay,
If that which is
Thank you. By the way, that's the person he's quoting there is Father Denzel Muley. That's Meuli, and he was from New Zealand. That's why he says Kiwi. That's
Got it.
That's the name for the New Zealanders. Okay, certainly it is true that a declaration that something has taken place doesn't make it so, right? You can make a declaration that's false, of course. Like I said earlier, by the same token, this is also true if you point out that something didn't take place. Well, if it did, it did, and if it didn't, it didn't. So of course the declaration doesn't make it so, but it is the judgment of the Holy See in the external forum that this is what happened, and from that judgment there is no appeal, since you cannot overrule the judgment of the Apostolic See. Like, that is the highest court, that is the highest authority. And let me just remind you, when Pope Leo XIII declared the Anglican orders, right, the Anglican ordinations in the Anglican Church to be invalid, this was in 1896 in this bull Apostolicae Curae. When Pope Leo XIII rendered that judgment, guess what? The Anglicans wrote something against that and, claimed to refute it or whatever. It didn't matter. The Holy See had rendered its judgment, and that was what Catholics needed to believe. And that is actually an infallible decision.
Well, and I know it's the same thing happened with Martin Luther, that I know that the Pope excommunicated him, and directly after, Luther said, well, no, I excommunicate the Pope.
Yeah.
Like, well, of course, the one getting, as you said, the one getting excommunicated is not going to be like, oh, great, yeah, okay. Not
well.
Maybe they'll repent, of course, but
yes, yeah, and there are some, like, for example, well, this wasn't an excommunication, but Father Antonio Rosmini, he had one of his books, put on the index, and his certain propositions in the book were condemned by the Holy See, and Father Rosmini, he submitted. So he was not pertinacious, he was not recalcitrant, he was not defiant, he wasn't trying to contradict the magisterium of the church. And so when it was pointed out, when it was condemned, he submitted. So that's good. And that is the whole point of an excommunication to begin with. The excommunication is supposed to tell the delinquent, hey, what you just did here is so bad that by you doing that, you cannot be saved. And you're in mortal sin, and you've committed a grave crime against the right order in the church, against the law of the church. You must repent if you want to go to heaven. That's the point of the excommunication. And of course, that is not at all what we saw from the Society of St. Pius X, from Archbishop Lefebvre or Bishop de Castro-Meyer. No, they were very defiant, as was Leonard Feeney. And that's very tragic. But, and of course, like you said, with Martin Luther. But the point being that Kennedy Hall cannot simply overrule the judgment of the Holy See. Okay, it is a dogma of the Catholic faith that the judgment of the final judgment of the Holy See cannot be overruled. And at best, yeah, so Kennedy Hall, he's quoting a canon lawyer, okay, from New Zealand, and a prestigious canon, fine. But at best, all you can say is that you found one canon lawyer, or maybe a few, because I know there are others, but you found some canon lawyers who agree with your position. That's fine, but it's not the position of the Holy See. And that's what matters. I mean, do you think the Holy See doesn't have canon lawyers?
Right.
Right. So I think this is a lot, like, this really reveals that the Society of St. Pius X and there's a lot of these recognize and resist traditionalists don't understand. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. That is not what determines, what you must go by, and it doesn't get you off the hook. So you can't play defense lawyer and judge and jury at the same time, right? It's essentially private interpretation is what it is. Now, you're allowed to say, hey, you know what, whatever. You could say, I'm not convinced. Like, I think this decree or whatever from the Holy See is not convincing or whatever, but you still have to obey it.
Right. But I think that's something that seems to be forgotten in our times, that it is a monarchy, right? That this is not the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not a democracy. It is, and I think that probably, especially Americans, probably, I guess everybody, but I mean, there's just this idea that well, I don't like it, and these people don't like it, and 100 people don't like it. Thus, it must mean something. And when again, it's like, who cares? It's a monarchy. If the Pope says, that's what goes. And I think you see a lot of Sede Vacantis fall into similar issues, that we don't really know what it's like to honor and respect and obey a pope, because in a lifetime we haven't had it. But that doesn't mean that you just say, well, poo on all that. You just can't do it. It doesn't work that way.
That's right. And I think that this reveals very much a schismatic spirit, if not outright schism, to have this attitude of, we will not be told. That's exactly refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff is the definition of schism.
Right.
And that's exactly that. Like, the Society of St. Pius X will not submit to the Holy See unless they agree with what it says. It's insane. Right. I mean, if that's not schism, I don't know what is.
Right.
And then, sometimes people say, oh, but they pray for the Holy Father. Well, that's nice. Right. Schismatics can pray for the Pope, but prayer is not submission.
Right. In this idea that, it hasn't been officially declared, and even Bergoglio says we're not schismatics. It's like, well, but listen to what you're saying. It's this round reasoning and this logic that I think in many ways it's a bit dishonest. Maybe not dishonest. Maybe it's just this, it's this cognitive dissonance of, like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to say that there hasn't been a pope since 1958, so I have to find some other solution.
Yes. Yeah. So the problem is they really see nothing wrong with willy-nilly. Well, maybe not willy-nilly, but they are perfectly happy to basically overrule the judgment of the Holy See, and they don't think anything of it because, diabolical disorientation, right, or state of necessity. This is all private opinion. This is all private judgment. You cannot do that. That's not how the papacy works.
Right.
So let's go ahead and see what else Kennedy Hall has to say. I think he was quoting that canon lawyer. So again, it's nice to see that he found a canon lawyer who agrees with him, but the canon lawyer's judgment does not trump the judgment of the Holy See. Right. And besides, I guarantee you can find canon lawyers who say the opposite. So why is Kennedy Hall's canon lawyer better than the others? Right. It doesn't, you can't just do that and say, because I found a canon lawyer here who says what I agree with, therefore that is now the objective judgment. It's not how it works.
All right, here we go.
Asserted is true. It is true not from the assertion, but from some other source of legal consequences. In itself, it has no more juridical weight than a similar statement made by the corner grocer. What
Yes,
he's
but that
saying
works
here
both
is,
ways.
if you declare something to be a legal reality, you have to show by the due process that it is, in fact, legally the case. This
Okay,
was
well,
never
Cardinal
done.
Ganton did that. He showed the canon and pointed out that that's what Archbishop Lefebvre did. And so the result is that the canon applies. I mean, what else is there?
And again, it's late sentencia, right? So it is
So it happens
by itself,
automatically.
right? Exactly. So it's like what juridical process needs to happen when it is ipso facto, right? I mean, it doesn't. Again, the argument doesn't make sense.
It's the whole point of a late sententia excommunication is that you don't need the intervention of a judge in order for it to take effect. Right. That is why it exists. And by the way, only the Catholic Church can do that, because only the Catholic Church has the ability to bind your conscience and bind you in the internal forum. So that's not something, for example, a secular state could do, right? There's no such thing as late sententiae penalties in secular, like in civil law and in criminal law of a secular state. Impossible, right? I think we can just go ahead with more of Kennedy Hall.
Sure. The SSPX. It is its provenance that determines its clout. If it comes from a court in session, lawfully seized of the subject matter and it's condemnatory, then it is a judicial sentence with consequences, one of which is the right of contestation, that is, the right of appeal. The subject declaratory statement was made by Cardinal Gantin, prefect for the Congregation for Bishops, and it is revealed in the text to be no more than an advertisement of the material elements of the matter. So what he's saying is, if you read Cardinal Gantin's letter from 1988, he basically just says, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre did this, canon law says this, therefore you're excommunicated. That's not how it works.
Precisely.
That's not how the law works.
That is how it works. That is exactly how it works.
These pieces of information exist, therefore the penalty exists.
Yeah, I mean, what else? How else is it going to work? By the way, we all know. I think what Kennedy Hall is getting at is that there needs to be a trial now. I don't know where he gets that idea. I mean, honestly, if somebody, God forbid, commits an abortion, do we then have a trial or something? It's nonsense.
But it sounds to me like it's seriously getting this entire process of how the church works. They're mixing it up with the democratic process, or your due process in the terms of law in a court. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems like that's kind of getting mixed up with the process that he imagines here.
Yeah, I mean, there are there are ecclesiastical trials with judges and so forth, but I mean, here we're talking about, again, a late sententia excommunication, and honestly, let's not kid ourselves. If there had been a trial, a canonical trial with defense lawyer and prosecutor and ecclesiastical judge, if that judgment were to go against the SSPX, do you think they'd accept it?
No.
Of course not.
Right. Great point.
I mean, and that is just, you know what? Maybe, I don't know. Well, I was going to say maybe they would now. Certainly not back then. Now, I don't think so either. But you never know. Maybe they've been, they're really a mixed bag when it comes to their relationship with Bergoglio and stuff. And anyway, okay. But okay, a little more Kennedy Hall.
It is a decree, but it is devoid of the note's characteristics of a legally binding decree. For example, a clear identification of the court in session when it emerges. This never happened. Despite that deficiency, it could be argued by someone determined to pursue the matter that it is, nevertheless valid, but the exercise would be in vain since the decree repeats the self-same error to be found in the apostolic letter Ecclesia de Afflicta. This is the letter put out by John Paul II. In any case, this is just one piece of evidence. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the SSPX, bishops that is, were never excommunicated. Even if you believe they did something wrong, which I don't, but by the letter of the law, the actual process that's supposed to take place never did take place. In addition, this never applied to the hundreds of priests, none, and religious in the order. Furthermore, people will point to this letter by John Paul II that we're going to get to in a second, the meat of that letter, and say that Archbishop Lefebvre was declared excommunicated by the Pope. No. Again, even if we take this at the letter of the law, what we have is that on July 1st of 1988, a bishop, a cardinal who is in charge of a congregation, makes a statement regarding what he believes to be the legal status of the legal reality, the canonical reality of Archbishop Lefebvre and the bishops. There's no court in session. There's no process taking place, as we just described, but nonetheless, that's his opinion.
That's his opinion.
Later, John Paul II,
Right.
There's a letter released from John Paul II.
And what Kennedy Hall is giving us right now is not his opinion, right?
Right. Exactly.
But yeah, keep going. I'll have something to say about that John Paul's letter here in just a moment.
Echoes a similar opinion, along with other things. People take that to mean that John Paul II excommunicated Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, but Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre was never excommunicated by Pope John Paul II. And the reason we know this
that's
is that in
true.
canon law it tells us that.
Yeah, that's true, because we're not like what he's talking about is a condemn. Excuse me. Yes, I guess a condemn, like a ferende sententia excommunication. John Paul II didn't stand there and say, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, I hereby excommunicate you. Like that was done with Leonard Feeney, right, in 1953. But so that did not happen with Marcel Lefebvre. And I might just add, if it had happened, they would have still said it's not valid. But so it's true. But the problem is that oftentimes we'll say, we'll speak in a more conventional way that is not always technically accurate, right? So people might say that, well, John Paul II excommunicated Lefebvre. Okay, technically that's not true. What they should say is that John Paul II either declared, or John Paul II, like Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre incurred automatic self-excommunication under John Paul II, and John Paul II confirmed it.
Right.
Okay. There's a quicker way to say that, and that's John Paul II excommunicated Lefebvre, even though, and then that's just how people talk.
Right. Right.
So but just to be clear, but yes, so Kennedy Hall is right if he's saying that no, John Paul never excommunicated Lefebvre by ferende sententia. That's true. Now, let me quote from this apostolic letter, Ecclesia Dei Afflicta. This is number 3, paragraph 3. He says, quote, this is John Paul II speaking, in performing such an act, meaning the episcopal consecration, without papal mandate, notwithstanding the formal canonical warning sent to them by the cardinal prefect of the Congregation for Bishops on June 17th last, Monsignor Lefebvre and the priests Bernard Follet, Bernard Tissier de Malloret, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta have incurred the great penalty of excommunication envisaged by ecclesiastical law, period. Okay, so there you have the Pope himself confirming this is what happened. I mean, that's it for the external forum.
Right.
You can't say, well, but I know a canon lawyer who says that's not true. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because you know what? I know a canon lawyer who does say it's true. And you can appeal to Rome. You can say, hey, we don't believe this is fair. We think this is, or whatever. You're leaving out certain evidence. But if Rome declines and says our judgment stands, you're out of luck.
Right.
And I'm not questioning the motives of the people. I very well understand. Believe me, I understand that they're all just trying to fight the Vatican II garbage. I get it. I understand.
Right.
But this is one of the reasons why it's so important to recognize that John Paul II was not the Pope. These things matter. They're not just opinions and rash judgment or whatever, presumption. It all, like, there's an ecclesiology here that where you can't just do your own thing and say, well, I have good intentions, and therefore the rest doesn't matter. You can't do that. So even though Kennedy Hall is right in saying that John Paul II never personally excommunicated Lefebvre, he very much affirmed the decision, or rather the decree of Cardinal Ganton, saying that this automatic excommunication, which by the way is operative by the law itself, so the very fact that the law says an excommunication is incurred when you do such and such means that it actually is incurred.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's automatic. That's the whole point.
Right.
And here John Paul II again affirms that it happened. Now, again, Kennedy Hall may say, well, but him saying it doesn't make it so. Okay, but we're talking about the external form. If you're looking for infallibility or whatever, no, that doesn't apply here. But it's a matter of authority. Okay, in the external forum, that's what the church, the Holy See, is saying is valid. Okay, so this is what is binding on your conscience. Keep going with Kennedy Hall, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
Decision. This is Canon 330. I think it's subsection 3, but don't quote me on that. But I think I'm right.
Is the volume high enough there?
I can turn it up.
And link to the description. When a pope makes a decision that's a legal decision, it's very clear in canon law that there is no recourse or appeal possible. The pope says it, we're just going to have to write it out, hope that the pope one day will reverse it. But you can't actually appeal it. It's not like the courts in our countries. But here's the thing. That means that if the pope were to have declared Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre excommunicated, that would mean that a pope would have to lift the excommunication, if that means no one can do it besides the pope. But in 2009, it was not the pope who lifted or recognized as lifted the excommunications of the 4 bishops that are still living. It was in fact the cardinal, or I don't know if he's a cardinal, but the bishop who is in the same position as Cardinal Gantin in 2009 under Pope Benedict, who was in charge of the same congregation. If it was the Pope who had done it, then it would have been the Pope who had lifted it, but that never happened, which is just further evidence.
Okay, please stop for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess he's still arguing, he's still laying out the evidence that John Paul II never personally passed sentence on Archbishop Lefebvre. I don't know of anyone who argues that. But the point is, so the excommunication that was automatically incurred in 1988, that excommunication is reserved to the Apostolic See. Means only the Holy See can lift, only the Pope can make that decision and remit the excommunication, right? Reverse it, so to speak. And so on January 21st, 2009, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, who is the successor to Cardinal Ganton in that office, he's now the prefect for the Congregation of Bishops. He writes, quote, "On the basis of the powers expressly granted to me by the Holy Father Benedict XVI, by virtue of the present decree, I remit the penalty of excommunication late sententiae incurred by Bishops Bernard Fillet, Bernard Tissier de Malloret, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta, and declared by this congregation on July 1st, 1988. At the same time, I declare that as of today's date, the decree issued at that time no longer has juridical effect," unquote. Well, guess what? So that means it had juridical effect, right? Until that remission. And so, Kennedy Hall can say, well, I don't believe that. Okay, but that doesn't matter. Yes, it doesn't change anything. Right? You can, God forbid, but if some unbeliever were to say, I don't believe in the resurrection, okay, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So,
right. So what about his argument that only the Pope can remit that issue? And it sounds like it wasn't the Pope, it wasn't Benedict, but it was
Cardinal Ray. Well, no, he just said
yeah.
that the powers. So Benedict XVI delegated that to him.
Okay.
And said, basically, I'm investing you with my power to remit this excommunication, right? And in fact, on March 10th, 2009, Benedict XVI wrote a letter to the bishops of the Catholic Church concerning the remission of the excommunication of the 4 bishops consecrated by Archbishop Lefebvre. And he basically, because there had been some controversy about that, oh, why did he do that? A lot of these Novus Ordo liberals, of course, were totally scandalized by that. And then there was this issue with Bishop Williamson, and he had made some comments that caused controversy. And so there was that led Benedict XVI to write a letter to all of his bishops explaining his motivations and so forth. And interestingly enough, in the very first paragraph, he writes, "I therefore feel obliged to offer you, dear brothers, a word of clarification which ought to help you understand the concerns which led me and the competent offices of the Holy See to take this step." Okay, so clearly it was his decision. Okay,
Right.
so the excommunication was reserved to the Holy See. That is stated in canon law. So that's where that comes from. A canon law comes from the Pope. And so the Pope, or the supposed Pope, then lifted that excommunication in 2009. So I think this is all pretty straightforward. But I understand that, of course, the SSPXers are looking for anything they possibly can to throw at that, because they don't want the excommunications to have been valid. But it works. You're the but judge. So please.
Sure thing.
Thank our sponsor. You can hear my dog.
Aye. We don't need to hear your sponsor, Kennedy.
No, I think that was just his. Oh, okay. So here comes. Okay, he's done about excommunication. Now he's running an ad for beard oil, which I think
you and I don't need, right?
No, but I think he's definitely the right man for that.
This is true.
Nation in the Middle East.
Right?
No.
Now he's going to have a reputation of being a beard oil salesman.
I guess that could be worse things.
Yeah, right. Kennedy, we're just.
Yeah. So he has a fabulous beard.
Appealing from statements from the last few years of Pope.
I'm just trying to find. I should have written this down before.
No, that's okay. Please go. Okay, no. You know what? Go to 9 minutes and about 38 seconds, because he says something interesting there.
From people besides just some YouTuber that say the same thing. So we have to remember that the alleged excommunications and schism took place in 1988. So if we can find a source real close to that says the SSPX is not in schism, this is pretty important. We can't. Some people will say, well, we're just appealing from statements from the last few years of Pope Francis, but the SSPX has been in schism the whole time. That's not true. And we know this because here's a very interesting statement. This was from the President Emeritus of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, Edward Cardinal Cassidy. In an official letter, it was, and it's cited in my book here, the actual citation for the letter and the protocol that it followed. He said, "I would point out at once that the Directory of Ecumenism is not concerned with the Society of St. Pius X. The situation of the members of this society, and the only people who are members are the priests and bishops, is an eternal matter of the Catholic Church. The society is not another church or ecclesial community in the meaning used in the directory." So if this is true, this means that in 1994, 15 years before the alleged excommunications of the bishops were lifted, this means that to say the SSPX were in schism is to say that there would have to have been a schism within the Catholic Church.
Okay,
Put that in perspective for a second.
All right, so notice that what he's doing is he's quoting Cardinal Cassidy, who at the time was basically the chief ecumenist in the Vatican, right? The cardinal prefect of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. And he's saying, so Cassidy was asked, well, how come your congregation or whatever, your council doesn't deal with the Society of St. Pius X, right? If we're going to be ecumenical, why aren't they included? Why do you only talk to the Lutherans and so on? And he says, well, because that's an internal matter of the Catholic Church. Like, we have nothing to do with that, right? In other words, they're in a different position as are, Protestants. Okay, fine. That is somewhat puzzling, considering that John Paul II said that it was a schism and so forth. But I mean, don't expect a whole lot of consistency from the Novus Ordo Vatican, is what I would say. I mean, Vatican II ecclesiology is a gigantic mess. But what I find interesting is that all of a sudden, Kennedy Hall wants us to go by what one cardinal of a different congregation says. And all of a sudden, I guess that makes it so then, right? That makes it true.
Right.
I mean, he just spent, I don't know how many minutes arguing that just because Cardinal Ganton says something, who's the proper authority on the matter, that just doesn't make it so. Okay, so here comes another cardinal saying something that Kennedy can use, and all of a sudden, hey, he said it, so it's, maybe not the final judgment on the matter, but it's at least, authoritative to some degree. So here he takes a very opposite or a very different approach to the approach he took to Cardinal Ganton. Right, when Cardinal Ganton issued his decree with a declaration of excommunication, automatic excommunication, that was just his opinion. But he doesn't say, well, Cardinal Cassidy was just offering his opinion. It doesn't mean anything. So
Right.
that, and honestly, when I was in the SSPX, I would have done the same thing because, and it's not even, it's not like, oh, you're doing it maliciously or, with conscious dishonesty or whatever. It's just you immediately jump on stuff that you think you can use that defends you, right? And you instinctively try to make that seem, or at least, you instinctively consider that to be authoritative and kind of maybe not settling the issue, but at least, it's something you can use. So you throw it in. And then when there's something you can't use, all of a sudden you think, yeah, but it's not infallible or it's not authoritative or that's just an opinion. But that's, you can't do that. It's understandable on a human level, but that's not how these things work.
Well, and you see why the church always says that you're the safest in the church's bosom. I suppose, following what the church teaches, following the authority of the church, and it clearly makes sense. I mean, you see the effects of Protestantism when people start to make their own decisions of what's good and what's godly, etc. It just ends in chaos and ends in everyone kind of being their own god and humanism, etc. And so it just makes, and I think that you start to see that now again, if you start to think that you can question the church and you can be the one, plugging all the pieces together, dangerous. And I understand too, for obviously from our side, it's also a dangerous road too, because we also have to look at the church as it was, 70 years ago, being the same now and not make up our own stuff either. And that's also, yes. It's a tricky thing. Yeah. Very,
very important. Yes, indeed. But, again, somebody in Kennedy Hall's position could essentially say, hey, I'm making a good case for, that exonerates the SSPX. Okay, but then you have to submit that case to the Holy See for a judgment.
Right.
But instead, he basically thinks that because he's made a case, therefore it is so, and therefore that is now the objective truth of the matter, and that you can act on that. I don't think that's defensible. And then Kennedy Hall just spoke of. I'm sorry, what timestamp are we at? Can you check that real quick? Because he just said something. Maybe you can back up about 15 seconds. And because he was just mentioning something about a schism within the Catholic Church.
We're at timestamp 1040 now.
Okay, yeah, let's maybe just
after backing up, yeah. Or should I back up more? I backed up 10 seconds.
Go ahead. No, that's plenty. Go ahead.
Ecclesial community, in the meaning used in the directory. So if this is true, this means that in 1994, 15 years before the alleged excommunications of the bishops were lifted, this means that to say that the SSPX were in schism is to say that there would have to have been a schism within the Catholic Church. So put that in perspective for a second here. If the SSPX was ever in schism, it would have had to have been done by 1994, and we don't have any evidence that there was ever any declaratory statement on this other than it was just an assumed fact, which means it must have just been the case.
False. I'm sorry. Stop for a second. Sure. John Paul II said it in Ecclesia Dei. Okay, he said that the disobedience shown by Archbishop Lefebvre, and I'm not quoting, I'm just paraphrasing, that this disobedience constitutes a schismatic act. Okay, and he says, and this is a quote, "Everyone should be aware that formal adherence to the schism is a grave offense against God and carries the penalty of excommunication decreed by the church's law." Now, this is important. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. If they're already excommunicated by the episcopal consecrations, why are we bringing up an additional excommunication? Well, you have to understand that he's talking about formal adherence to the schism, and that is something that can be committed by laity. Okay, so now we're branching out. We're not just talking about the 6 individuals involved in the conferring of the sacrament of episcopal consecration on June 30th, 1988. Here we're talking about anyone really, lay or cleric, it doesn't matter, who formally adheres to the schism. Now I don't think that is defined specifically in there, but essentially, from my understanding is that would mean that you are willingly, that's the formal aspect, right, adhere to this position of the Society of St. Pius X that is defiant against Rome. That's a submission to the Roman pontiff, refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff. So that's, I think, what they mean by formal adherence to the schism. So clearly, John Paul II declared this to be a schismatic act. Now, if he is the Pope, was the Pope, as the Society of St. Pius X has been so adamant, right, in arguing, and all the non-Sedevacantists, or at least the rabid anti-Sedevacantists, they're always so insistent that the Novus Ordo popes are true popes. Well, then if he is the Pope, then that is law. Like that is, in the external forum, it is so. And in fact, I think I got a nice quote here by Pope Pius IX, because, this wasn't the first time in church history that someone was excommunicated and then said, no, it's not, that's not true. I dispute that. Let me see. So the encyclical, okay, here it is. Beautiful. So Pope Pius IX, he lists a whole lot of evidence from tradition regarding this. And then he says, quote, "All these traditions dictate that whoever the Roman pontiff judges to be a schismatic for not expressly admitting and reverencing his power must stop calling himself Catholic," unquote. Right? That is from the encyclical letter Quartus Supra, I believe it was from 1873, I think. And let me see, there's one more quote in regard to that. Quote, "Most men feel that the church's supreme head and shepherd should decide who are Catholics and who are not," unquote. Right? That also from the encyclical Quartus Supra, which is a veritable syllabus of Lefebvrist errors. I mean, it really is phenomenal. It's almost like it reads as if it had been written specifically for the Society of St. Pius X. It's that similar to what went on with the SSPX. Quartus Supra, Pope Pius IX. So, I mean, this is just common sense. Okay, it's the Pope who gets to decide what is and isn't schismatic. It's the Pope who gets to decide who is in communion with him and who is not. I mean, if it's not the Pope, who else is it going to be? Right?
Kennedy Hall.
Kennedy Hall, right. And so you can't simply, Kennedy Hall is essentially arguing that if the Pope says you're schismatic and you disagree, then that means you're not.
Right.
It's really hard to comprehend the lengths to which they go to argue for their position. And you can play more of Kennedy Hall. I think he's about to start talking about Francis giving faculties of jurisdiction to the SSPX and that proving them not to be in schism.
For someone to say that the SSPX is in schism, they would have to say that the SSPX, that there's a schism within the Catholic Church.
Yes, Vatican II ecclesiology, right? Welcome to Vatican II ecclesiology. I know Kennedy Hall is trying to say, well, this is obviously absurd. Well, you know, the concept of schism in the Novus Ordo Church with Vatican II ecclesiology is a mess. And in one of my articles, I said, good luck trying to, it's like nailing yogurt to a wall. Okay. Mm-hmm. They are and are not in communion. They're in imperfect communion, partial communion, whatever communion. It's a disaster. So my point is just, don't say that, oh, well, if this were true, then that means the Roman authorities believe there's a schism within the Catholic Church. Yeah, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, they might as well believe that. They very well might. I mean, these people now believe that God wills false religions. Why wouldn't they think that schism, the Catholic Church, can be schismatic at the same time? In fact, didn't Bishop Schneider or one of these, I think it was Athanasius Schneider, who, oh, don't quote me on that now. Well, wait a minute. There was something about Pope being in schism with himself. But okay, let me I take it back. I can't verify this right now if it was Schneider or not. So I'm not saying it was Schneider. I take it back. Somebody talked about that, and just to I'm just bringing this up to show that all sorts of absurdities result if you think that Francis is the Pope, right? Or if any of these Vatican II popes were true popes, you run into complete absurdity. And I know.
Sorry. I just got to mention real quickly that there was a crazy. You were commenting something about this, you know, this issue I think a couple of days ago on Twitter, and it was about, and then you had these this argument with the SSPX and Schism, and then Sede Vacantis are in Schism, and then like directly beneath that on my Twitter feed was the fact that the Coptic, I think it's the Coptic actual schismatics were saying Mass in St. Peter's. So it's like you see again. You can't argue logically when you're saying that Bergoglio is Pope in Vatican II. You can't, because it doesn't make any sense. So you're saying, so the argument is, okay, the SSPX isn't in schism. It's like, well, the actual literal schismatics just said Mass in St. Peter's. So
thank you.
Who
in St. John Lateran, yes.
Oh, say it. Sorry. Yeah,
might as well be said. Actually, St. John Lateran is worse than St. Peter's. Because although St. Peter's is the basilica that is in the Vatican and that we associate with the Pope, it is just a basilica. It is not the cathedral of the Pope. St. John Lateran is his actual cathedral where his episcopal chair is. So, yeah. Okay, keep going.
One could make an argument similar to that. And if I actually say this in my book as well, again, which is in the description to the video, St. Paul does write to the early Christian churches and say, let there be no schisms among you. So what he's talking about there is he's saying, let there be no divisions among you. That's what the word schism means. He's not just writing a letter saying, hey, fix that juridical schism where you started two apostolic churches. That's not what he's saying. It wasn't an official schism like the split between East and West. Right. What he's saying is don't let there be divisions amongst you. Now, if somebody wants to argue that regarding the situation of the SSPX, there is some sort of division, I agree. There is a division. There's a division between modernism and traditionalism, and you're going to have to find out which side you're on. Nonetheless, as far as setting up an official church, some sort of official schism, formal schism, that does not exist, and it's never existed. And again, which I cite in my book, Father Z, who did work for the Ecclesiastical Commission, he makes it very clear a couple things. One, the fact that Pope Francis has recognized the SSPX has faculties means that not only are the priests and bishops of the SSPX not in schism, they can't even be under any penalties. Meaning, you cannot give priests who are suspended or under penalties any faculties. So the fact that
notice that Father Z, he means John Zulstorf, he's not, why isn't he dismissing what he said as just an opinion? Because it works for him. It's a good argument for him, right? So it's a double standard. If Zulstorf had said the opposite, he would have said that's just Zulstorf's opinion. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's not how we're going to resolve this, or how we're going to get any clarity about what is actually true in these things, right? And so, okay, so he's making there. Let's take the Reverend Zulstorf's argument that Francis couldn't be giving faculties to schismatics, therefore the SSPX can't be in schism because Francis gave them faculties. I would say be careful. Don't say that Francis couldn't do something because of Catholic doctrine. Don't do it.
Right.
Okay. So I mean, Francis is Francis, right? He doesn't care about church law except when it suits him. He's not into rules. He just doesn't care, right? Let's enumerate a few things. He lets unrepentant adulterers receive Holy Communion. He tells priests to absolve penitents even when they're not sufficiently contrite, okay, which is a sacrilege because the absolution is invalid. He says apostates are part of the church, right? We're brothers, he said, right, in the church. He acknowledges Anglican clergy as valid, okay, at least in practice. I know he doesn't say it in like a document, but he kisses the pectoral cross of the Archlayman of Canterbury, right? Tony Palmer was an Anglican bishop, and Francis ordered him buried as a Catholic bishop. It's insane, okay? That man was a layman. Then Francis says that the Eastern Orthodox bishops are pastors, true pastors of the flock, the holy flock of God. Okay? He allows the heretical and schismatic Patriarch Tawadros II to use the cathedral as St. John Lateran, as we were just saying, for a public mass. Don't say, oh, well, Francis couldn't do that, so therefore, it can't be. Oh, Francis could very well give faculties to schismatics. He's basically, with all this ecumenism, he's basically acknowledging that they have faculties because he thinks they're all in the mystical body, that they're all, they're all receiving grace and forgiveness and so on. So, and by the way, I would also point out that the Holy Catholic Church does give faculties jurisdiction in the internal forum very much also to schismatics in danger of death, okay? Only in danger of death. But that shows that it's not intrinsically impossible to do that. So I think the argument from this Father Zulstorf, which is being repeated by Kennedy Hall, the argument that, there can't be in schism because Francis couldn't give him faculties, I don't think that argument is going to work. Mm-hmm. All right, so I said a lot. You can keep going. And I know he's about to go into part 3, which we can skip.
Okay.
Altogether, but go ahead.
2015, Pope Francis puts out a letter saying the SSPX has jurisdiction to hear confessions, means that not only must they be in the church, but they must be in the church and without any penalties.
Yeah,
as Father
okay, so I just threw that out of the water.
Even if someone were to have committed a schismatic act, that does not mean the person's entered into schism and that person has created a schism. So all of this information means that even if you believe Archbishop Lefebvre was wrong, which I don't believe,
I don't know,
but even if you did, you cannot say he created a schism. There is no schism to be found, and that's as clear as early as 1994. Fishing to.
Right. Sorry, the Society of St. Pius. I know I'm going to get slaughtered for saying this by some people. The Society of, again, assuming John Paul II, assuming the Vatican II Church, that's the Catholic Church, and all of that, it is a textbook example of schism. I mean, totally. The best you could say is that they mean well and that they're trying somehow to uphold, tradition because they know Vatican II is garbage. Fine and good, but it is still schism, okay? And schism is intrinsically evil, meaning there's no conceivable circumstance under which it would be permitted. Like there's never going to be a case, and this is guaranteed by God himself, who made the moral law, and therefore himself being all knowing, of course, already foresaw every possible circumstance. There is nothing in the world that can make an intrinsically evil act good. And so, make sure I don't lose my train of thought here. But yeah, so the SSPX, they are, again, we're not looking at intentions. I'm sure most of them are of incredibly good intentions and are just trying to do the right thing. Fine. But then, I also know, Baptists who are just trying to please God and live in accordance with his law. I do. And that doesn't make them right, though. So we need to separate the intention from what's actually happening. And so the Society of St. Pius X, in my opinion, now I'm not a canon lawyer, and I'm certainly not their judge, but as far as I understand, as far as I can tell, they are precisely fulfilling the conditions for schism, because they do, in fact, refuse submission to the Roman pontiff. That's exactly what they do. They make good arguments, perhaps, for why you should, but like I said, it's intrinsically evil to do so, and therefore never permitted. Granted, not every act of disobedience is schismatic. That's true. But there is a habitual refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff, because they will never be bound by they refuse to be bound by his judgment unless they agree with it, which of course means they're simply submitting to themselves, if you will, right? They're replacing their judgment for the judgment of the Holy See. That's exactly what they do.
Sorry, I think it's interesting when you compare it to City of the Contest, that, I mean, you see how they'll accuse us of, you know, not caring about the papacy, or not listening to the papacy, or being schismatic, or not Catholic or Protestant, and then they'll call us ultramontanists. So it's like, wait a second, you know, which one is it? You know, so are we ultramontanists who obsessively care about the Pope, or are we someone who are Protestants who don't care about the Pope at all? And I think it shows you that the truth is somewhere in the middle, that we do greatly love and venerate and respect the Pope, and know that we must listen to the Pope when there is a Pope.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, you can find what I just said about how the SSPX won't accept the decision of the Holy See unless they happen to agree with it. Here's a perfect example. The 1968 rite of episcopal consecration of Paul VI, right? They, in 2005, 2006, they came out and said that's valid. Okay. Before then, they had disputed that. There were different opinions about that. Well, you know what? The Holy See, again, if we assume that Paul VI was a valid pope for the sake of argument, the Holy See already told you it was valid in 1968.
Right.
Okay? You did not accept that judgment, did you? You didn't accept the judgment until you personally, or I mean, not personally, but you, like your organization, basically verified whether their judgment is correct or not is a whole different can of worms I don't want to get into. Just to see the principle at work here. They wouldn't accept it as valid until they were satisfied from their research, from their understanding, that it was valid. They did not accept the judgment of the Holy See because they ultimately, consider only themselves, consider themselves to be the final arbiter of these things, which also explains, why they have marriage tribunals, right? In which they judge marriage cases, and whereas the actual tribunal with authority, if Francis is the Pope, would be the tribunal of the diocese, right? And the SSPX has no business reviewing that. Not if the Holy See is occupied, is validly occupied, and there is a Pope and so on. You can't just insert yourself and say, well, we're going to take that over now. And, your judgments are garbage, or oftentimes are, so we're going to have to review that. I'm sorry, I don't see how it's not schismatic. It's exactly what it is, because it's not that you're acting without authority. You're actually defying what you recognize to be the legitimate authority, and that is the essence of schism. Right. It is precisely the refusal to, the refusal to submit to what you recognize as the lawful authority. People often think that not acknowledging thinking that, so we do, we say Francis is not the Pope, right? And they say, oh, that makes us schismatics. Well, of course we're in schism with Francis. Yes, of course, with Jorge Bergoglio, absolutely, we have nothing to do with him. But just subjectively considered, the reason we refuse him communion is because we don't believe he's the Pope.
Right.
And if we're right on that, then we must refuse communion with him. We must refuse submission to him, of course. And so, anyway, yes, I forgot where exactly we were, but go ahead, and then we can skip part number 3. Number 3 talks about the issue of whether Archbishop Lefebvre ever said the new Mass or not. I have no idea. I've never accused him of that, and frankly, I really don't care. It's not important to me.
according to official statements from relevant congregations in the church.
I think,
in addition,
Kevin, you can just jump ahead to 16 minutes and 3 seconds.
Number
This is interesting.
4. The traditional Mass is being suppressed because of the SSPX. This is one of the dumbest arguments against the SSPX. And there's a few reasons for that. And this again is in my book. If you look to why the traditional Mass was liberated at all within the Catholic Church, it is very clear, and I'm saying after the council, obviously it was free before the council, but if you look to why it was liberated at all in the Catholic Church by Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, etc., it's very clear under Pope John Paul II that they recognized many people were flocking to the traditional Mass that the SSPX was offering, and they didn't like that. Now, again, we can debate the opinions that the popes had about the SSPX another day, but it's simply a historical fact that the old Mass was liberated in order to allow people who wanted to attend the SSPX to not have to, basically. I don't think there's a problem attending the SSPX, but obviously they did. So just historically speaking, the fact that there is the traditional Mass at all after the promulgation of the new Mass is historically because the SSPX sort of pushed the envelope. Some people will say that currently Pope Francis is suppressing the old Mass because Catholics are attending the Society of St. Pius X.
Okay, stop.
This means a couple different...
Okay, because he's now going into a different argument. Okay, so he just made an accurate point about, hey, the only reason you even have the indult Mass is because of Archbishop Lefebvre. That's true. However, the charge that the Francis is now cracking down on the traditional Mass because of the X, I would argue, is likewise true. Maybe not because of the SSPX per se, but because of the recognize and resist movement. My point, or my answer to Kennedy Hall on this point, is that the two positions, Kennedy Hall's and the one he's arguing against, are not mutually exclusive. I think they're both true. It is true that historically, certainly, the indult Mass, they got the diocesan indult and the Fraternity of St. Peter because of Archbishop Lefebvre in an indirect way. That's true. And basically because of his resistance, right? His recognize and resist position, because of that. But at the same time, that is also the reason it's now being shut down. Let me explain that a little bit. So the motivation behind why John Paul II allowed the traditional Latin Mass in the first place was to keep people from going to the SSPX and to keep them from associating with that recognize and resist mentality that rejected Vatican II, that hated the new Mass, and so on. John Paul, and you can read this in the documents like Ecclesia Dei and Quator Apinc Annos and Summorum Pontificum. They are essentially they're allowing their Novus Ordo people who prefer the traditional Mass, they're allowing them that so that they are not tempted to join the Lefebvrist movement or, basically the recognize and resist movement, so that they stay away from that. Like, look, if you prefer the traditional Mass, we'll give you the externals. Here they are. Just stay with us. Stay with the diocese. Stay in communion with the bishop. You use the new catechism and so forth, right? And so that was the strategy in the 1980s and 90s. And, then came the internet. And I think this has a lot to do with the fact that with the quick and easy sharing of information, people who were already attending the traditional Mass, they got very effectively and very quickly exposed to a lot of the recognize and resist material. Excuse me. Right? Let's just call it propaganda. It's just easier that way, right? So that, I think, was disseminated rather effectively. And so people got into these things, and I think the recognize and resist movement grew a lot because of the internet. So that in the end, it was not just individuals going to the indult mass, once a month or once a week or whatever, but now they had a quick way of sharing lots of good information. And so the traditional mass, excuse me, essentially, I think it was, now, of course, this isn't true for all people, but for a lot of people who were attending the traditional mass were precisely the Peter Kwasniewskis of the world, right? The defiant Vatican II hating, new mass hating people. They were just going to the diocesan indult instead of to the SSPX for whatever reason. And if you look, I mean, a good example is the remnant. Excuse me, I'm going to have to drink something here. A good example is the remnant, which was, I mean, they were certainly pro SSPX, but it's not an SSPX publication, nor are they SSPX, nor do they only endorse the SSPX. They got a lot of indult. They're basically, I would consider them an indult publication with sympathies for the SSPX. If you look at their material, like that stuff is exactly what Francis is talking about when he's talking about an ideological use of the traditional mass. It's not just a matter of external preference. And by the way, it shouldn't be anyway, but just to point that out. So the experiment or the concessions that John Paul II and Benedict XVI made regarding the traditional mass did not have the intended effect. Francis is actually right about that. If the idea was to keep them all in the Vatican II Church so that they would stay away from those from that recognize and resist movement. Instead, it actually made the recognize and resist movement a lot stronger. And I know, see, just like I adhered to the SSPX about 20 years ago. Before that, I adhered to the indult movement. So I was there too. I know what I'm talking about, okay? And you had people, attend the indult, that some of them were Novus Ordo and just thought this was also a nice mass to go to. And others were rabid, hardcore SSPXers even, who would sometimes go to the indult if it was maybe more convenient or whatever. And and some rejected Vatican II, others didn't mind Vatican II. You had a mixed crew there. And so the same motivation to keep people in the Vatican II Church that was operative in the 80s and 90s, and then with Summorum Pontificum in the 2000s, that same motivation is now behind Francis Traditionis Custodes. He is now abrogating, he's phasing out the traditional mass because he's saying, well, this didn't work, and now we've got this huge recognize and resist movement on our hands, and so we're just going to take it away from them and then let them either enter into full-blown formal schism or let them come back and embrace Vatican II. From his perspective, if Vatican II is true and the new mass is good, that makes perfect sense. So I think Kennedy Hall is wrong to say that the argument that the traditional mass is now being suppressed because of the SSPX or because of SSPX theology, that's garbage or that's a dumb argument. I think he's wrong. It is very true, and so is what he says regarding how the indult started. So does that make sense? I'm being long-winded.
I think so. So I would ask, why then? Why does he continue to squash Francis? That is, he's really putting down all of these different indults in their, different churches and different groups even. And it doesn't seem like he's even attempted to do anything against SSPX. And it seems like he's even kind of brought them closer to him.
Absolutely.
In many ways. So what's the case? Why is it that why is he quashing the indult and kind of bringing in the SSPX?
He has bent over backwards for the SSPX to be nice to them. And the only the only reason for that I can think of is quite simply, he doesn't control them. He cannot control them because they refuse him submission. So he has to woo them, right? He has to make them offers they can't refuse. And, Bergoglio is an evil man, but he is clever. And he's a tactician. He's a strategist. He knows how to move pieces on the chessboard. And with these things, no doubt you have to be patient. And I think he's being patient with how he's approaching this. And he knows that if nothing changes, the SSPX is going to once again have to consecrate bishops, and he knows that, and he knows it will once again be an automatic excommunication. So even if he does absolutely nothing, they're going to ruin themselves.
Mm.
So in my opinion, Bergoglio has a very special gift in store for the Society of St. Pius X. I'm not entirely sure what it might be, but it's going to be something probably where my guess is he's trying to galvanize all the recognize and resist forces into the SSPX. And then all he needs to do then is get control over the SSPX, and he's got them all. Right? However, he might do that, either by them being in full communion with him, and then he gets to call the shots, or if they continue to refuse him communion, he can excommunicate him or declare him schismatic, and they're all gone. So I think Francis is being clever. He's playing the long game here. And that I think is a possibility. I don't know if that's true, but I think that would explain at least why he is so nice to the SSPX. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how the SSPX doesn't see through them, or maybe they do. I mean, I'm not really in touch with them, but they certainly were happy about the faculties they received, even though they didn't need them. They said they didn't need them, I should say. And they've been very conciliatory towards Rome.
Right.
At least.
Well, and again, this is when all the time Bergoglio constantly is saying that they're the problem. The rigid traditionalists. I mean, clearly he's at least partly talking about them. I mean, that's really obvious. And if that's the case, again, why is it that they're just kind of like more and more stepping to him with open arms rather than saying, well, wait a second, we better be a little careful here.
They really are very conciliatory, right?
Yeah.
And it is bizarre. Normally you would think they should be screaming at the top of their lungs, and instead they're kind of just like, we'll do it, we'll continue doing our own thing and whatever. It is troubling, because the situation, I mean, if the situation was bad in 1988, which Lefebvre thought, justified him consecrating bishops against John Paul's permission, well, the situation today is so much worse. And yet you don't hear that much from the SSPX. I mean, sure, they have some articles that are critical of various things, and Father Pagliarani, the Superior General, just gave an interview in which he really demolished the theology underlying the synod on synodality, and showed how that's modernism. But you just kind of wonder, like, okay, so if they see all these things, like, what are you doing being part of that?
Right.
And if they then say, well, we're not part of it, and say, see, there you go. That is refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff. Right. But it's an odd situation. They always kind of, they are and aren't part of it, and it's their ecclesiology is just as bad as Vatican II ecclesiology. Well, maybe I should. Well, yeah. I mean, it's not Catholic ecclesiology. That's the problem. Right. And
and I think it's a horribly sad thing, because I mean, I was very shortly with we attended SSPX as well, but I think it's got to be so confusing to think you have a pope, and to think the pope is a joke, or a clown, or someone that you should not even just like laugh at, but someone you should absolutely in no case listen to. And I mean, when you really think about how tragic that is, I mean, I wish they would see it that way. And I think, again, they see us and say, well, you just don't think there's a pope, and because you don't, all these different arguments that they have. But I think theirs is a very sad position, because they say there is a pope, and he's leading souls to hell.
Exactly.
You don't have to listen to him.
When Catholic dogma is that because of the Pope, the gates of hell shall not prevail. Right. It is the Pope who is what prevents the gates of hell from prevailing. It's not tradition. It's that too, of course, but tradition itself can't do anything. It's the person of the Pope, right? First of all, it's the office of the papacy, and then the person of the Pope who fills that office that constitutes that living magisterium. And I know they don't like the term, but it is a true term from from Catholic theology. I've seen Pius X used it, as far as I remember. And yeah, that's the purpose of the Pope, right? The Pope makes sure, and this is by divine institution. And yes, the Pope makes sure that essentially the church is one. He makes sure that the church is Catholic, apostolic, and so forth. And they have the absurd scenario where they have a Pope, but the Pope doesn't do those things.
Right.
So it's just very, very problematic, much more problematic than our position, where we're just saying, well, we don't have a Pope, we don't know of one, and sorry, but we didn't create the situation. We're not exactly sure, what to do here or what's going on, but we're at least not gonna falsify this the description of the situation. I mean, it is what it is, and you got to trust in God. You got to believe in all the dogmas. You've got to believe in the Holy Catholic faith. You've got to adhere to those things, and certainly do study and see. There's some explanations that people have come up with, but some are good, some are not so good, and fundamentally, though, certainly we laity, we don't have to have all the answers to these questions. But it's better to have no answer than to have an answer that is definitely wrong. And it's not fun to sit here and say, I don't have all the answers. This is difficult or whatever. But, the apostles on Holy Saturday didn't have all the answers either. That didn't mean there weren't any, right?
Right.
So I find this of the utmost importance because mystery is possible, but contradiction is not, right? And so it's much better to say, I don't know to something than to offer an answer that is contrary to Catholic dogma, to the Catholic faith, right? So that's my 2 cents on that. Do we want to? Okay, so let me just wrap up my response here to this fourth segment. I would put it this way: yes, both are true. That the traditional Latin Mass was liberated because of the SSPX or SSPX theology, that kind of resistance position, and it is likewise true that the traditional Latin Mass is now being suppressed again because of that same theology.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think that it's what do you do? Mario, I feel so bad for these guys. I mean, seriously, I do. I wish they would just. I don't know. I wish I could sit down with them and just say, hey, let's think, let's do this together. Let's think of an actual solution, because I think, again, it is, as we see with Kennedy Hall, and he seems like a perfectly nice guy. You can hear a bunch of little kids in the background. So I mean, it's not niceness, and I'm sure, as you said, it's not that he's looking for error. He's not trying to be wrong.
Sure,
but again, there just seems like there's just some things that just don't connect. There is almost some points that just don't. I don't know if they don't think about it, they don't consider it, or they just don't want to, because again, I think they consider that there are some conclusions they just can't make, right? So they can't go there, so they have to find something else. And as you say, so it ends up being my opinion or this cardinal's opinion, or not this cardinal's opinion, but this card, and it gets to be a bit icky.
Yeah, right. And they'll say, well, but so where are your bishops with ordinary jurisdiction? Well, I'd have to ask in return, well, what good are bishops with ordinary jurisdiction if they don't have the Catholic faith? Right. Then we don't need them. It does not solve the problem. It's fine to say we must have bishops with ordinary jurisdiction. Maybe we do. But if we do, then that is already proof that they exist, right? Because, that's what the faith tells us, if that is absolutely necessary. And it might be, I'm not sure. But the solution cannot be to point to Novus Ordo bishops and then say, well, but we have to resist them here and we can't trust them on that. And then so we don't need bishops just for the sake of having bishops.
Right.
But that's a different topic for a different video.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good.
So
do you want to continue on, or was that wrapping up with his?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I think there's still a little bit left.
Sure. All right.
Promulgation of the new mass is historically because the SSPX sort of pushed the envelope. Some people will say that currently Pope Francis is suppressing the old mass because Catholics are attending the Society of St. Pius X. This means a couple different things. On the one hand,
I don't think
established.
I realize he's responding to an argument here. That's not an argument I would make, that Francis is suppressing the traditional mass because people are attending the SSPX. No, I think the problem is people are attending the indult, but with an SSPX mindset.
Right.
Yeah, at least that's my spontaneous reaction to that. Go ahead.
The SSPX are not in schism and never have been. That means that Catholics who attend the SSPX are attending masses offered by Catholic priests in the Catholic Church, which would mean that if Pope Francis was actually suppressing the old mass because Catholics were attending the SSPX, that would mean that Pope Francis is suppressing the mass because Catholics are attending a Catholic mass. That's absolutely insane. That would prove Pope Francis to be some sort of evil maniacal dictator, which ironically would justify the positions of the SSPX that there's a grave crisis in the church because the Pope is literally canceling the liturgy because Catholics are attending it, offered by Catholic priests. That's insane. Now, if the SSPX is not in the church, which I believe they are, but let's just say they're not, that would mean that the SSPX are in schism. So if Pope Francis was suppressing the old mass because Catholics were going to a schismatic church, that would be like Pope Francis suppressing the Byzantines because some Catholics decided to go to the Eastern Orthodox. Again, that would be insane. Why would he punish Catholics who remain in the church because of Catholics who leave the church? Again, this would prove Pope Francis to be some...
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't make the argument that Francis couldn't possibly be doing something because it will be insane. Right? So, but okay. I think, so he's got a part number 5 about, is Archbishop Lefebvre still excommunicated? Ooh, my light just went out. See, this means it's time to go. That's fine. I'm not interested in going into that 5th segment. We can skip that. Let me wrap up with a few things here, just that I'd like to point out that a lot of people, I think, may not be aware of. On September 8th, 1713, Pope Clement XI issued a bull against the errors of Pascal Quesnel, and that bull's name is Unigenitus. Okay, you can find it in Denzinger, and 2 of the errors of Quesnel are particularly important for this whole situation with the Society of St. Pius X, and just recognize and resist traditionalism in general. You can find them in Denzinger, in the old Denzinger numbering, number 1441 and 1442. They're errors number 91 and 92 in the bull. Let me just quote these. Number 91, the fear of an unjust excommunication should never hinder us from fulfilling our duty. Never are we separated from the church, even when by the wickedness of men we seem to be expelled from it, as long as we are attached to God, to Jesus Christ, and to the church herself by charity. Again, that's condemned, what I just read, condemned by Pope Clement XI. And error number 92, to suffer in peace an excommunication and an unjust anathema rather than betray truth is to imitate St. Paul. Far be it from rebelling against authority or of destroying unity. Again, condemned by Pope Clement XI. And then maybe some people should be reminded of the Vatican I dogmatic constitution, Pastor Aeternus. Chapter 3 says the following, and this is found in Denzinger 1830. And since the Roman pontiff is at the head of the universal church by the divine right of apostolic primacy, we teach and declare also that he is the supreme judge of the faithful, and that in all cases pertaining to ecclesiastical examination, recourse can be had to his judgment. Moreover, that the judgment of the apostolic see, whose authority is not surpassed, is to be disclaimed by no one, nor is anyone permitted to pass judgment on its judgment. Therefore, they stray from the straight path of truth who affirm that it is permitted to appeal from the judgments of the Roman pontiff to an ecumenical council as to an authority higher than the Roman pontiff. These three quotes I wanted to make sure I got in here. And, I know what all the different excuses are, or the arguments that are brought forth, to go against it, like, oh, but the Pope is bound by tradition and tradition is superior to the Pope. No, it's not, it's actually not. So it has to be understood correctly, and it's very often prone to being misunderstood, but I don't want to open that can of worms now. Let's just say that just as the recognize and resist traditionalists appeal to tradition as something that can, as the reason for why the papal judgment isn't binding, so the Protestants do the same thing, appealing to Scripture. At the end of the day, you cannot govern the Catholic Church if in the end every person gets to decide for himself the right course of action. That's not how it works. And with that, I think I'm done saying what I had to say. So hopefully this was helpful to people. Of course, as always, we went a little bit longer than we probably imagined we would.
But my camera's gone out twice. You lost your lighting, but no, as always, I appreciate it, and I hope, hey, maybe Kennedy will give us a response, and we'll have another 2-hour episode here in the coming weeks or months. But I think, again, as we've said several times, we mean it in goodwill. It's not meant to attack anybody. It is meant to clarify, and I think that's. Yeah. I think that we need more conversations like this, to be honest. I mean, conversations that aren't nasty, they're not attacking. They're just like, hey, look, okay, you say this, and this, it's right or it's wrong. And I think it's a good way to approach it. And I hope people appreciate it. And anybody who stayed this long, we appreciate you guys.
For sure. And I have to apologize. I didn't notice it until just about 15 minutes ago or so. People say, hey, you know what? You've got a wobbly picture. Okay. Apparently, yes, the camera wobbles, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the camera is attached to the monitor, and the monitor is attached to the desk. And so if I do this, I get that. So, yes, there is a way to fix that, but, well, I didn't fix it in time. So sorry, I didn't think about that.
If that was the worst of our problems for tech issues, Mario, we would be in good shape.
Yes. So I guess, final thought, just remember, in the Catholic Church, you cannot judge your own case. Okay. You can be the defendant, but you cannot be defendant and judge at the same time. So if the Holy See has judged against you, even if you're technically in the right, which of course everybody always thinks he is, tough luck. Sorry, then consider it a matter of divine providence. But the judgment of the Holy See cannot be canceled or invalidated, declared void, or it cannot be surpassed by anyone else. That's how it works in the Catholic Church. And if you're going to be a traditional Catholic, that's what you'll have to accept.
Perfect. Mr. Mario Derksen of NovusOrdoWatch.org. Go check it out if you don't already know, though. I imagine most of you guys do. Of course, subscribe, support him. If you like the show, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff. And we hope to have him on again soon.
Thank you very much. Also check out tratcast.org, where you get my podcast,
which are also very awesome. All right.
Thank you, Mario. Kevin, for having me. Thanks. Very much.
Until next time, God bless you.
All right. God bless. Bye.